Hello, Tordrick here, back from my Advanced Wars by Web hiatus. Timed out of a ton of matches, had to deal with some real life stuff, but I'm back in, I'm queued up, and I'm ready to regain that lost rating. And here on YouTube, I'm ready to make a new video series, this time talking about the most important concept in Advanced Wars by Web, which is tempo. Tempo is something that you hear thrown around a lot, and a lot of the time it's not super clear what it exactly means, but it basically, in a one or two sentence explanation, is when you are able as a player to make the proactive move over your opponent. That can come into the game in a variety of different ways. You can be a couple turns ahead in pushing your army towards the enemy HQ if both players are going for like an HQ cap. You can have a positional tempo lead where you are in the center of the map and your opponent is split up, so you can choose to annihilate the left side or annihilate the right side of the map, and have the tempo there. You can have tempo in terms of builds. You can be forcing your opponent to build certain units, and therefore you know where those units are going to be on the map. So there's a lot of different things that relate to tempo, but at a high level, tempo is what determines a lot of games. The player who can make the plays on the map typically will win them unless they make some catastrophic mistakes. So I will be doing a multi-part series on this topic, but today I'm going to be starting off with Recons. So let's get into it. So let's go over a primer on Recons first. Recons are 4,000 Advanced Wars dollars, and they are great at taking out early game infantry and disrupting captures. The best combo alongside Recons is other infantry, because you can use a recon to weaken up an infantry, and then use a full health infantry of your own to finish off the kill. And that will preserve your infantry at full HP and being able to pressure caps on the next turn. And it's kind of hard to punish recons unless you know that there's no tank backup. There's pretty specific situations that you need to know about, and it's map dependent. But recons can kind of be like a frontline smacking infantry and killing them off and weakening up your opponent's defenses and forcing out tanks to attack them. That's why they're really, really strong at sort of choosing where the engagements take place. If you pop your recon on a city, a tank cannot one-shot that. Tanks can only one-shot recons if they're in shoals, roads, that kind of thing. And they're pretty easy to pick off with like a tank plus an infantry on plains or something, but recons on cities, pretty nasty. And so a tank is not going to probably want to tank that engagement, because if another tank pops on that city afterwards, you've got a really bad engagement that you've started, and it's kind of hard to back out at that point. So there's two ways to use recons, like in just a general sense in the early game. One is that you want to use them to enhance a death ball that you're going to go into, and usually that's when the center is really, really important and the sides are a little less contested or less easy to disrupt permanently. So Assassins, this map here, is a great example of that. The center is super contested. These two properties right here, oftentimes you'll have games where neither player gets these, and it's kind of fought over the entire match. And whoever can get them can win the game, because the rest of the properties are a little bit easier to fight for. There's some forests here you can pop down artillery to then protect yourself, capping these side properties. And the comm towers are never really contested. You'll oftentimes see someone take control of the center, and then they get the tempo to decide whether to attack the right or the left. And when you can split your forces, you can split your enemy forces into one side or the other. You can just choose one side to completely obliterate. And that's oftentimes how this map gets games ended on it. So this game is a matchup of Lash versus Javier. So obviously in a hard matchup, this is my Lash alt that I pick Lash into every CO. So that's why there's kind of this weird matchup. So we're going to start at looking at the Death Ball scenario for Recons, and then I'll explain scenario 2 for Recons. So day 4, I go for this Recon here. This is a map where an artillery is forced, so I have a good idea that this Recon will be able to interrupt at least the first thing it sees without having tank intervention. So my plan is get a bunch of these infantry, cap these properties on the way to the center, and then prepare to death ball into the center really early and try to pick off some infantry and cap these 2 properties before any meaningful vehicles can get there. Because I know with my Lash bonus, there's not that much terrain, and Javier will just outstat me as the game goes on, so I want to try and get some meaningful lead over him in the early game. So that's what this Recon is for. Try and give me the tempo to dictate that the game will be played around these 2 properties and that I'll own both of them. So we'll skip ahead a couple turns, and I get my Recon into position up here, and I have my 3 infantry ready to contest. So I have vision on both these properties, and I'm waiting for Kantbe to go for some caps, because then once he does, I can go for my hits. I get my Recon plus my infantry, will kill it off. I'll have a full health infantry, then I can start a cap, and I know just from how I have to open that he can't have more than 3 infantry here. I've got a tank that has vision on all of them, and I can also see the ones that are moving up this way, so I know this is his entire force. So he moves up and he aggressively starts to cap both of them, and at this point, this is the game. This is what I would say is the game deciding turn. The game isn't over at this point, but I get a pretty nice lead that allows me to stay in this game, even as a CO that is much weaker than Javier. So I can go for the Recon hit plus the infantry, preserving the infantry HP, and then I can start capping, and then I can also interrupt his cap, and now I have a massive infantry lead. You can see I have 4 infantry that are in place to contest these properties. He's got 1 6 HP and 1 7 HP, and then literally nothing else. He's got more development on the sides than me, but I've decided to use this Recon to give me tempo in the center to try and take control of it, instead of going for more development on my sides. So as a result, our incomes are pretty much the same right now, and I believe he could probably get more properties and have more income in the short term, but this tempo advantage that I'll have in the center, being able to take these contested properties, will be much more valuable in the long run for me. It also gets me a free kill, and unit count is king. Unit count is the most valuable metric in this entire game. So now I have vision on his tank, and then I can start capping, and this property is a lot easier for me to defend because when my tank chain rolls out, the tanks can move 6 spaces and then go on to this city, so tanks cannot interrupt this cap, no matter what. Because if they go and try to interrupt and he uses his infantry to finish off my infantry, or even if he starts using his infantry, he's just going to start suiciding infantry and losing unit count. So this cap is pretty much guaranteed at this point. I got the contested one that he is usually supposed to have an advantage taking. And then at this point, this is pretty much what I wanted to finish off showing, but I can then, after I've used my Recon to Death Ball, I could either opt to use it to sit on top of these properties and then threaten the tank follow-up, because tanks will not be able to hit this Recon without threat of that city getting cleared up, and then I can just go and hit from a city tile onto a plains tile with a tank and get a really good engagement. but I can also use the Recon to then pressure from the center away from the side that I know he's starting to reinforce with tank chain. So now these infantry are vulnerable. I have tempo in the center. I control the center, so his forces have to be split between going through the right side and going through the left side, because if he tries to station them in the center, he's going to have to deal with the units that I'm going to have the first chance to place there. This game ends up sort of a while, but like you can see that the game is fought over the center. I always have this 2k lead, and then I can just kind of push through that. So that's the first instance of how to use Recons, to deathball in the center and combine them alongside other infantry to empower your own infantry. So let's go to the second example. So the second way to utilize Recons is building a Recon on your strong side to disrupt your opponent's weak side. Lots of maps have, 2 base versus 1 base, and then one, on the other side is 1 base versus 2 base. So you're going to want to build your Recon on the 2 base side and disrupt your opponent's 1 base side, because they'll have less units being built there. Most of the time it's a lot of infantry, and then your opponent wants to be able to build vehicles on their strong side and start pressuring there. But if you have a Recon there, a Recon costs 4,000, and the only counter to having it harass all your infantry is by investing 7,000 into your weak side. So that simultaneously forces them to build something, decreases the power they can consolidate into their strong side, and also disrupts the development of their weak side. So they'll get less properties, less income, and be forced to defend it and have units sort of just like sitting around on the weak side, where then you can shift your Recon and deathball into your strong side. This is the map Normandy. A very early match actually played on it between myself and Mobliv, and this is a time when I was only building tanks. I was tank Tordred, but I have now realized that Recons are extremely good on this map. They are able to disrupt this comm tower and this property behind it, and that can help dictate the game to be about your opponent trying to recapture the comm tower. Because for yellow, strong side is over here with this comm tower, and then the weak side you have the HQ and you have a couple of these properties. Generally what people do now is that they send their infantry in the black boat, and then they go straight for the comm tower so it can't be interrupted by a Recon. But this is a pretty early match, so I just decided I'm going to go for properties and then, chill out, get the comm tower later. It's not any money and there's no engagements happening, so it's not that useful. But the big thing about this map is that this comm tower is very easy to take in the early game, but once there are vehicles in the area, it's hard to actually cap successfully. It's easy to defend if you have the comm tower here. You can place mechs in the mountains. You've got a nice forest for an artillery you can maybe get here, or you can just get a line of infantry that are really hard to penetrate, since you'll have mech support. So because you'll have mech and copter support, this is a really good defensive position once you own these properties. If you don't own them, a lot harder, which is why the Recon is a pretty normal buy on this map. So let's just kind of see how this plays out. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and show you. So both of us go for mechs plus a bunch of infantry, and we're capping properties, but notice the difference. I only have tank here. This tank has pretty much nothing it can do for a while. He's already got a Recon on the front lines. This Recon is going to do some work because it's going to step straight on this comm tower. And then there's not really anything I can do. I move onto this mountain to try and see something because I don't really want to get trapped, and I kind of feel out, there's a Recon here. This is not good because there's no way I can dislodge it in the next turn. And then the turn after, it would have to be a mech hitting this, but by then the strong side is already going to be reinforcing with tanks, so this mech will only damage the recon and then just get killed by itself because it don't have any firepower here. My initial goal for this game was to play around my strong side, so I sent both my tanks towards my strong side. But this just means that Moblev is able to take this comp tower, and I don't get my comp tower. And in Adder matchups, that's huge, because Adder does not have a 10% attack boost on any of his things. He has no abilities. So getting that plus 10 attack enables a lot of extra kills on cities, for example. And we're going to skip ahead because I mostly just want to show how important this was. I kept trying to capture this comm tower so often, but you can see that there's like just a never-ending stream of infantry here, so I really can't do anything. And then, meanwhile, he's also pressuring the exact same way, but I basically have to be like, okay, I'm gonna have to keep joint capping, destroying my unit count, and trying to just be like, okay, take these good engagements for yourself, and I'll try and just, get compensation, because it's kind of hard to fully stop these comm tower takes. So he gets another interrupt on that, and then moves in 3 mechs and a copter. Like, this is where I kind of wanted to resign this match, because I knew, like, once he gets both comm towers, it's a GG. It's really hard to come back from that. And that's like my 3rd join cap, and I'm putting more units on the front lines to get mowed down by mechs. So then when he gets his side slip, he can just come in and obliterate both sides. I'm able to eventually take his comm tower, but at like the cost of all my vehicles and pretty much any pressure I have on my strong side. And this is where the game is pretty much over at this point. You can see that he can clean up every single unit on my weak side, and my strong side's push is completely new. The game goes on a couple more turns, but I end up resigning. So I want you to see that how important pressuring weak side with strong side recons could be. Both deathballing with the recon and using it to disrupt development on the weak side are both extremely useful in gaining the tempo advantage in the game and dictating how the game is supposed to be played out. In this match, I would not have had to go as hard into this comm tower if Moblev didn't have it already and then was pressuring to take this one from me, because I had all my vehicles on this side of the map, and he had all his vehicles on this side of the map. Now, I can either take mech engagements with my vehicles and take terrible engagements all the time and get this comm tower back, or I can go down 2 comm towers, and neither option is good, and that's all. It all comes from the first recon. The first recon changed the entire game, and this was when I was like, okay, well, maybe recons are a little bit better than I give them credit for. And I started building a lot more recons after this game. So I hope you learned something. I'm going to be doing more videos on tempo in the near future, so I hope I see you for those ones. Goodbye.